I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Last week we took a look at the best gank fights in Soulsborne, link in the description, and this week we're taking a look at my worst gank fights in Soulsborne. Compared to the more positive side of this list, we're honestly spoilt for choice with this category. For as much as I love a well-designed gank, they're so easy to tweak into a state of being unbalanced and, dare I say, a little messy. Maybe it's the enemies not pairing well together with a moveset, maybe it's the difficulty combined with a brutal boss run back, maybe it simply asks too much of the player for the part of the game they appear at, or the opposite and ends up being far too easy an experience. So, let's begin. My top 10 worst gank fights in Soulsborne, ranked. Let me know your least favorite gank fights down below. Coming in at number 10, we have the Twin Dragon Riders from Dark Souls 2, a game that will admittedly feature quite heavily on this list. For as much as I love the B-Team's outing with the series, I feel their ability to balance combat difficulty was rather skewed. Case in point, you're halfway through the Castle Drangleic, one of the toughest areas in the game, filled to the brim with deadly traps, enemies, and mini-bosses, only to be faced with a mid-level boss fight against one of the easiest bosses from earlier in the game. But this time, there's two of them, and one has a ranged attack! The Twin Dragon Riders aren't a difficult or terribly unfair fight, they're just an insult to the term boss fight. At least Prowling Magus and Congregation, who just barely avoided today's list, are memeable in their awfulness. Most people though forget the Twin Dragon Riders are here as they're quickly overshadowed by the Looking Glass Knight, the true boss of the castle. They reek of padding to fill out a boss quota, something that Castle Drangleic admittedly suffers with given most of the enemies you find are ripped straight from prior levels and boss fights in the game. Mediocrity is one thing, laziness is another, and that's why despite being a footnote in their own game, the Twin Dragon Riders earn a mention as my 10th most hated gank in Soulsborne. Coming in at number 9, we have the Soul Sekiro entry on today's list. A game that focuses on single-player one-on-one combat was always bound to suffer a little bit when it came time for FromSoft's usual gankery. But of the main boss roster, there's only one true battle that fits this bill for me. It's the Headless Ape duo found in the Ashina Depths. Here you rematch with the Headless Ape, whom you likely defeated just minutes prior due to the game's progression, and the fight is exactly the same. Time your blocks, utilize your shinobi spear, and avoid those fear screams to survive. It's once you take out its first health bar that the gank begins, as it calls down its bride, a female monkey, who uses the same moveset as his guardian ape form from earlier in the game. As you might be learning, one of my biggest pet peeves is reusing content for the sake of reusing content. It's one of the biggest issues with many Elden Ring bosses. It was an issue with my number 10 entry, and guess what, divas? It's an issue here as well. You can spam firecrackers and immediately kill the bride, which just takes away any sense of challenge this fight might have. But the other issue is that neither ape's moveset complements each other. One is twisted and insectoid with a fear scream that can let loose at any time. The other is a rabid, fast-moving, arm-swimming mammal with a penchant for eating shinobi for breakfast. It just doesn't have the effect the developers were going for, and feels incredibly lazy in what is otherwise a fantastic game for its combat encounters. Coming in at number 8, we have the sole Demon Souls entry of this list as we take a look at the Man-Eaters. Now, I know a thing or two about men, and let me tell you, no man that I know would want to be eaten by this duo. The Man-Eaters originated the two gargoyle trope that was continued with the Bell Gargoyles, the Belfry Gargoyles, and another fight we'll touch upon later in the video. And all I have to say is, fuck them. The Man-Eaters on paper feel like a solid mid to late game threat in Demon Souls, and combined with their thin bridge arena, you've got to be mindful of your movements so you don't go rolling off the side like a dumbass. This is fine, I don't mind this. The issue is that the Man-Eaters do not function as intended. They were not given the love and care that their AI deserved, and it's such a toss-up as to whether they're actually a threat to your character, or whether they'll just fly around the arena out of view doing absolutely nothing. There are reports of the man-eaters flying off into the distance and despawning, forcing players to kill themselves and restart the fight. It's a shame because I really like their moveset, the vocal screech attacks, the tail blasts, the general design, and the melee swipes all feel really unique, even for Demon Souls. But how can you enjoy a fight where the challenge doesn't come from fair difficulty, but from the RNG of a primitive AI system? It actually boggles my mind that they didn't tweak the AI for the remake on the PS5. I get wanting to stay true to the original, but when you were more than willing to butcher Latria's atmosphere in 3-1, you may as well fix some of the broken boss movements. Whew, I am getting heated. But at least I haven't been stuck on the man-eaters for too long. I couldn't imagine going to Latria as your first Archstone to complete though, then I'd probably experience true hell. They're this low on the list because I still kinda respect them. I still get it, they originated the tropes. They get the respect. But not the rest of these fuckers, not the rest of them. This video truly is a trip down memory lane of all the bosses I bashed last year in my rankings, as at number 7, we have the Champion's Gravetender and Great Wolf from the Dark Souls 3 DLC. This is the last fight on this list that, for me, is bad because of just how forgettable it is in the context of the game, but is worse than previous entries because unless you bought the complete edition of Dark Souls 3, you had to pay for the DLC to even access this fight. Champion's Gravetender is a gateway to the PvP arenas added in Ashes of Ariandel, and as such, it does make sense to fight an NPC, I'll give him that. It's a shame then that his weapon and design just isn't much to write home about, complete with 3 very annoying wolves that he starts off with. For such a beautiful arena, it felt like there should have been something more exciting than just an NPC. Once they get low on health though, the reveal of a giant wolf that's attempting to recapture the magic of Sif is disappointing. The issue is that we fought this wolf twice in the Ariandel snowfield, so this third and final fight is more of a footnote than an epic reveal of a new enemy. And you always kill the Gravetender with enough time before the wolf attacks, which makes the balance of the gank feel off from the start. I'd rather have had the wolf in the arena from the beginning to give this fight some challenge, but edit the AI so you don't have the wolf being so aggro when the Gravetender comes in for the kill. I just can't get over how in the Ringed City, every single boss was a banger in some way, including Half-Light, I'll die on that hill, but in Ashes of Ariandel, we had Sister Fried and then this. It's one of the worst DLC fights in the series, a topic I'll perhaps tackle at some point soon. But in terms of ganks, I've dealt with worse, as you'll soon see. Coming in at number 6, you knew we wouldn't make it through this video without mentioning the rats from Dark Souls 2, and we've got 2 completely different gank fights. But the one that offends me more, and thus the one that lands on this list, is the Royal Rat Authority. Like the prior entry, you can feel the developers attempting to recapture the magic of Sif from Dark Souls 1, as the Royal Rat Authority has practically the same hitboxes and attacks, looking less like a giant rat and more like a shaggy, disheveled pup. This alone wouldn't be worthy of a mention, but this is a genre of gank fight where the boss itself is nothing special, but its minions absolutely bring down the quality to a miserable degree. The 4 rats in the arena that aggro alongside the boss all have the ability to proc the Britney Spears toxic status, which is Poison's stronger, sexier brother, and will absolutely ruin your afternoon. If you can kill these 4 rats quick enough, the fight is a breeze and becomes a simple hide under the legs and strike classic. But more often than not, judging from the many posts over the years about this boss, you'll be poisoned and start scrambling for your moss clumps while getting wiped by the speed of the main boss itself. I like the idea of status effects when used in a unique way in a boss fight, but given rats aren't exactly everyone's favorite enemies in these games to begin with, it all feels very cheap and uninspired, in what I'd consider to be one of the most filler areas in the series, no less. If you want in the Rat Covenant, just go beat the Vanguard instead. They give you a much easier fight and a more unique area to explore in the Grave of Saints. When your gank is dependent on one half being unbalanced and broken but killable in a few hits, it makes the whole fight feel unbalanced as a whole and just isn't worth anyone's time.
Oh
Hey viewers, a brief moment of your time. It's February, I'm officially moved to my new home, but the journey for 20,000 subscribers before summer of 2024 doesn't stop here. Take a look at how many of you aren't subscribed, kinda crazy, right? So be sure, if you enjoy the rest of this video, to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future rankings and videos. Back to the list. Starting off the top half of our worst ganks, we have the Shoulder Gank Squad, found at the end of the Cave of the Dead in Dark Souls 2. I and many other YouTubers have gone on record saying that we dislike this fight, and while I do feel it is 100% worthy of a top 5 finish, I can at least see what the developers were going for. This trio of grave robbers each specializes in a different style of attack. You've got the Strength Havel build, the Dexterity Katana build, and the Range Support Archer, meaning if you want to succeed here, you have to take things slowly and whittle down each boss while avoiding the rest's dangerous attacks. Unlike the best gank bosses, all 3 enemies here have a high aggression, meaning you'll often be trying to get hits on one while the other 2 sneak up off camera to wreck your day from behind. One slam of that Dragon Tooth can decimate endgame level players, which would be fine if the boss didn't suffer from one of the worst boss runbacks in the series. The Cave of the Dead is part of a trio of truly awful Dark Souls 2 boss runbacks that were paid for. This was DLC. There's a reason why in Elden Ring, Stakes of Marika were introduced so players could get back to what they truly enjoyed, the battles, instead of the tedious running back from poison and petrification-filled caverns. I don't hate fighting these guys per se. Sarah, the old explorer, is fun to chase down, as his only melee counter to you is an S-stock that's easily dealt with. The Afflicted Grave Robber has a fun katana moveset with a lot of rolling and jump attacks that I vibe with. It's just Ancient Soldier Varg's bullshit that I can't handle. His Dragon Tooth is just too powerful and feels like it shouldn't be one-shotting players in the endgame. Two-shotting, fine, but one mistake and you're forced to restart the whole dungeon. It reeks of an unbalanced moveset attempting to call back to, hey, remember Havel in Dark Souls 1? These grave robbers, forced to defend this cave to the death following their own failed excursion, should be glad I set them free of the pain. Trio ganks can work well, look at the Shadows of Yharnam or the Ruined Sentinels as a perfect example from my last video, but we had to get through some rough drafts to reach them. Coming in at number 4, we have what I consider to be the original sin. The Royal Rat Authority may have had a bad gank fight based on the enemies chosen to inhabit the arena with the boss, but it wasn't the first fight to hit us with this style of terrible gank. You could argue this next pick doesn't deserve to be on this list, as it's one boss with 2 enemies inside the arena, but fuck it. The trauma that the Capra Demon has inflicted over the years deserves to be recognized for what it is. This fight is entirely based on your ability to dodge 3 attacks once you enter the boss fog into the incredibly small arena, 2 dogs and the boss itself. If you can roll past them, you'll be able to climb up the stairs, stand on this ledge, and funnel everything until you've killed the dogs and can face the boss solo. But if you slip up even once, you'll find yourself in a world of pain, likely an immediate death from either the Capra Demon's cleaver slices or the dogs being, well, Dark Souls dogs, need I say more? My top 3 worst ganks all fit into the traditional view of a gank fight. This is the last outlier of the group. But if I was feeling particularly petty, I'd have the Capra Demon at a solid 2nd place. However, I recognize it might be a controversial pick for some, so I bumped it down to 4th. It just sucks that you basically die 2 seconds into the fight, and then either have to fight through the lower Undead Burg and all the thieves that can parry you, or that long run from Firelink Shrine that just wastes time. It's not worth the investment, and is an early game struggle that caused many players to dip out of Dark Souls, which is a pretty rough legacy to hold. At least the Capra Demon itself has a fun moveset once you've killed the pooches, though. Is this growth? Taking today's bronze medal, we have the Godskin duo from Elden Ring. Now, do I consider this to be the worst fight in the game? Yes, without question. But is it the worst fight from a gank standpoint in the game? I'd say it's a close second. The Godskin duo is found towards the midpoint of crumbling Farum Azula and represents Elden Ring's desire to bring back the Ornstein and Smough trope of thin and fast enemy teaming up with a chonky but slow enemy to bring the pain. only they forgot the part where the Godskin Noble needed to be slower in his moveset. As such, your experience will likely be you getting bounced between the Noble's Fat Rolls of Doom and the Apostle's Gomu Gomu no Windmill attacks. They're both fun fights on their own, as shown earlier in the game, with the Apostle being one of my favourite solo fights in Elden Ring. But together, their movesets don't synergize in a way that makes for a satisfying gank. In my original playthrough, this duo was a wall, and I had to use all my summons and Mimic Tier to bullshit my way through because I just couldn't handle the level of aggression. It felt very unfair, but more so than that, lazy. This is because, unlike most ganks in the series, the Godskin duo don't have their own health bars, instead being tied to a single health bar like Bloodborne's Living Failures or Dark Souls' Four Kings. So it's not enough to kill one Apostle and one Noble. Nay, after defeating one, you have a short time before they respawn, forcing you to kill them again. The gimmick works in those other fights I listed, because with the Four Kings, the health bars are set so you only ever end up fighting 4 of them, maybe a 5th if you get unlucky, and the Living Failures are all just regular enemies who have simple to read movesets that make the fight more balanced. Godskin Duo, meanwhile, are a fully fleshed out pair of bosses that, when paired together, create an extremely oppressive atmosphere. Sure, in my recorded playthrough, I blasted through them with more ease, but that's a researched run where I'd beaten every possible boss in the game prior, so my level was exponentially higher than most players will be on a first run. It doesn't represent the norm, it represents the exception. I wish we didn't have this boss. Farum Azula already has Placidusax and Malekith. This mid-level battle wasn't required. If the fight didn't have the health bar mechanic, I'd be less hesitant to slam it, and I'm aware you can sleep cheese, but I try not to account for those methods in my rankings because then I'm just playing a different game at that point. And yet for how unbalanced and in many cases unfair the fight is, there's one Elden Ring gank fight that I feel is more egregious. But before that... Taking today's silver medal, we have Woedenaz from Dark Souls 2's Ivory King DLC. If you've viewed any of my Dark Souls 2 videos, you'll be aware of my absolute malicious and petty hatred for everything involving the frigid outskirts. I think it's without question one of the worst areas in the franchise, and Woedenaz sitting there at the end caused me a lot of personal pain. Yes, this is me getting my revenge. No, I don't care if their fight is technically well designed. Woedenaz are reskins of Ava the King's Pet, which already bothers me because you're reskinning a boss fight from the same DLC without much change being added to their movesets. They have the magic homing missiles, the claw swipes, etc. The only difference is that these cats can wreath themselves in a dark aura and regenerate their health when close to death, which makes them surprisingly tough to handle. They have super high damage output, and I'd respect it, if I wasn't forced to slog through the entirety of the frigid outskirts every time I wanted to refight them. I've told this story before, but in my first ever playthrough of this DLC, I wasn't particularly skilled at the game, and I constantly kept dying to the reindeers. To the point where I managed to create a path to the boss from where I'd killed the reindeers so many times that they had despawned for good. I was at this fight for a good 6 to 7 hours. This time around though, it was much easier. I knew the quickest path through the outskirts, I had a high DPS strength build to bonk what I needed to, but it still doesn't heal the pain and the trauma. More than anything, I just dislike that for this DLC, the optional bosses are reused assets, and yet Ava's fight is infinitely better. If you're going to reuse a fight, you have to one-up it, like the Smelter Demon in the old Iron King DLC. Otherwise, I'm just sitting here thinking, what's the point? This is easily the boss fight alongside the Ancient Dragon from the same game, where I willingly will think, pass, when doing a playthrough. And yet, as a gank, I can't deny that there is some thought put into their movesets and synergy to where I can't honestly call it the worst in the series. And yet I still feel no remorse for a silver finish. Coming in with the gold medal, the worst gank fight in Soulsborne are the Valiant Gargoyles from Elden Ring. And to me, it's not even close. By this point in FromSoft's library, we hadn't seen the classic gargoyle ambush boss trope since Dark Souls 2, maybe Dark Souls 3 if you count the Demon Princes. Yet its return proved to me that the power scaling to keep up with the player difficulty in Elden Ring was reaching a bit of a boiling point. As usual, you'll face one gargoyle to start with, wielding a short sword and a large axe that it can switch between as the fight progresses. You might even find the moveset pretty easy to deal with, and there's a chance you fought some of these enemies prior to this in the open world. It's when the second gargoyle lands that everything goes to shit. The fight utilizes the same system as the demon princes from Dark Souls 3. One boss will be more aggressive, while the other holds back, spewing poison attacks at the player. Or at least that's what I'd like to believe. You'll very often have both bosses being aggressive at the same time, making life extremely difficult. But the real issue though is that poison. The breath attacks that cause the status come out incredibly quickly, giving you barely any time to react. And on top of that, they're very muted shades of grey and green. It's very hard to notice at a glance. Countless complaints have popped up in the last 2 years due to the poison just being too difficult to see, especially for players with vision impairments or colour blindness. With the Demon Princes, the toxic was a very warm purple, easily noticeable. Here, it's a mucus swamp green, which would work if, well, we weren't fighting in an underground swamp. Do you see the problem? You ultimately have no choice but to whittle one boss down as quickly as you can to have any hope of defeating the other, because on their own the movesets are manageable, but together with the aggression and the poison, it's a hellish experience. It also doesn't help that the poison mist also staggers the player somewhat, which makes rolling out of the attack even more difficult. Everything in this battle feels designed to make the player miserable, and that's impressive when you've just come through an aqueduct with 2 Crucible Knight encounters. Are they the hardest fight in the world? No. But does this feel like the gank with the least amount of effort put into their synergy? Yes! And imagine trying to recapture the magic of the best gank fight in the series by accidentally making the worst gank fight in the series. It's honestly iconic. Thank God this pair didn't get a second phase. And that's my list. Thank you everyone for watching. There are no doubt many gank fights I missed out for this list, so feel free to let me know which fights inspired you to commit Sudoku to your game consoles and PCs down below. And be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my future videos. My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I've got my Twitter, I've got my Blue Sky, and I've got my Discord, which I should hopefully be more active in now. A massive shout out to my newest patron, Archangel14, thank you so much for your support, and the rest of my patrons, thank you so much. I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios.